Guten Morgen. Wie geht es Ihnen heute? Ich bin so froh, mit Ihnen in meiner Muttersprache zu sprechen. That was how I spoke when I was 9. I spoke English too, but with a heavy German accent. It was a cool and rainy day in Frankfurt, Germany, the day we set off to a new land. My brother and I piled into the back of our dark green Citroën, while our parakeet, Peter, sang in his cage between us. We drove through Germany and then the lowlands of Holland, singing German songs and listening to Peter whistle, not knowing anything about the new place we were going to call home. The long, choppy ferry ride didn't do much to comfort me, but I was excited, even though I was leaving behind everything I had known for the first 9 years of my life. Not only did they speak a totally different language in this new land, but they drove on the wrong side of the road. A few weeks after arriving in England, I attended my first day of school. Dressed in my crisp, clean school uniform, my blue beret tilted just right, I was eager to meet my new classmates. I was nervous, of course, but I was also excited and wondered what were these kids going to be like. At recess, I went out to play when a group of them approached me and shouted, "Heil Hitler!" I was stunned. I wanted to disappear into the ground. Other than my German accent, I had nothing to do with Hitler. Didn't they know I was just a kid like them who wanted to play and have fun? That was the beginning of years of being branded the outsider. I even remember an English school teacher slapping me on the wrists one lunch, shaming me for holding my knife and fork like a foreigner instead of the proper British way. Knowing I was different made for difficult years. I learned that to fit in, I had to become like them. So I worked hard to speak the way they did, to drink tea and eat biscuits the way they did, to be restrained and formal in my interactions as they were. I contorted who I was in order to be accepted. My American enthusiasm and curiosity had to be dulled, my German exactness had to mellow, and my foreign accent had to go. I had to abandon much of who I was to fit in. Feeling like the outsider can do that to us. It can make us pretend that we're different than who we really are. It can make us go silent so we go unnoticed. It can cause us to abandon ourselves and our culture in order to belong. And that was only the first of many cross-cultural moves in my lifetime. Each time I faced the same choice: be myself, stick out, and remain the outsider, or adapt and conform to the dominant group's demands. I wanted it to be okay just to be me, despite having a different accent and being multicultural. In each country where I lived, I remained the outsider. In the US, I'm labeled English, despite carrying an American passport. In Germany, I'm thought of as American. And in the UK, I'm simply considered foreign. I don't truly belong anywhere. Now, I'm aware that my sense of being the outsider or of not belonging may be mild in comparison to the relentless experience many others encounter. Some of us have more obvious differences we wear on our skin, or in our less able bodies, or in our gender, our accents, or our age. Others of us have more subtle differences, expressed through our sexual orientation, our beliefs, our faith, or our upbringing. I'm aware that my privilege, which I experience daily through my skin color, my economic position, my accent, my education, and my appearance, allow me to be part of an in-group that many do not automatically gain access to. In fact, I can't begin to imagine the constant othering that my lawyer friend with cerebral palsy experiences. Every day, wherever she goes, she's subject to microaggressions as she navigates the world in a scooter, with a body that doesn't look or work like the bodies many of us have. Every day, people treat her as less intelligent and a problem that must be surmounted. Every day, she has to make her way around a world that is set up for able-bodied people, that screams with yet another staircase, "You are different. We don't care about you here." Every day, she's treated like the stranger. I wonder how many people here have ever felt different from the crowd or like the outsider. I'm curious, if you're willing, raise your hand if at some point in your life you identify with the experience of being the outsider or being different or being the stranger. Yeah, that's almost all of us, I think. America is a land of immigrants and relocation. I think about the involuntary immigration of Africans into slavery, who were not only forced to go to a strange land, but when they arrived there, they were subjected to degrading, oppressive conditions. I think about the much maligned Irish in the 1800s, followed by the Germans, the Slavs, the Italians, and later the Jews, not to mention the vilified Japanese. I think about immigrants from Mexico coming to California, which was their land, by the way, only about 150, 200 years ago, who these days are often disrespected and undervalued in the US, to the point of discussing building a wall to keep them out. In addition, there's the current crisis of Syrian refugees who are risking all to find safety. Yet they're discarded by our nation for potentially being Muslim. Our fear of the outsider as a nation has reached frightening extremes. Comedian Jon Stewart said, "We've always been a nation of immigrants who hates newer immigrants." And yet, all these foreign people, these strangers, given the opportunity, will soon become our neighbors, our friends, even perhaps our relatives. Despite thousands of years of evolution, we still act like tribal people. We flock to where we think people are like us, where we feel like we belong. We move into neighborhoods where people look like us. We join churches where people think like us. We're so desperate for community that we will choose our friends, our political party, our sports teams, based upon this unconscious desire to belong, to be a part of something larger than ourselves, to feel at home. But as soon as we identify as the majority or the in-group, others automatically become the de facto outsiders. We create a dynamic of us and them, us and them. When we think our tribe is superior to another, we devalue others. When we start to believe that our viewpoint, even our holy liberal viewpoint, is the only correct and true perspective, it makes others wrong. But dismissing another because they're a stranger or different is the easy, instinctual way for tribal humans to behave. The harder practice, the stretch for us, is to extend ourselves across difference, across that which makes us feel uncomfortable, across that divide, and welcome the stranger anyway. And that requires us transcending our reptilian, tribal brain. It's not easy. Ironically, we all have a piece of the outsider inside us, as we saw just now. All of us have at some point had a new home, or a new school, a new city, or been a stranger in a group. But that vulnerable part of us that has felt like the outsider may also lead us to close up and reject others who are different. To protect ourselves, it may lead us to work to keep outsiders out. In fact, it was said that Hitler possibly had Jewish ancestry. Sometimes our own fears lead us to cover up our lack of belonging, our own insecurities. We want to feel safe. We want to belong. We want to feel at home. So it can be uncomfortable to invite newness into an established group. In our congregations, there's an inherent tension between liking who we are as a community now and not wanting to change, versus opening ourselves up to strangers and the unknown influence of others. There's an inherent tension between wanting to grow and attract younger members and families, while not wanting to sideline long-term established members who've done so much to build the community. But we need an influx of strangers for our communities to survive. Welcoming the stranger, as uncomfortable as it may be, forces us to stretch and grow beyond our baser tribal instincts. Welcoming the stranger encourages us to become more than if we remained cloistered and comfortable in our groups and ways. Welcoming the stranger may even be necessary for our survival as people and as a faith. Because it's the strangers who will transform us, just as we transform them. It's the strangers who will open our hearts and minds and breathe new life into our midst. It's the strangers who will save us. No culture, no society can truly thrive without the influx of new blood, new gene pools, new ideas, or new ways of doing things. Without the new, we stagnate, my friends. The world's great religions all invite us to welcome the stranger. The Hebrew Bible reminds the Israelites to treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. The Quran says, do good unto the neighbor who is a stranger. And the core of humanism suggests ethical, moral behavior that calls for kindness to our fellow human being. And of course, our own faith guides us to remember our interconnected web. How we welcome one informs how we welcome all. How we treat one affects everyone and the greater whole. What we strive to do as Unitarian Universalists is actually profoundly countercultural. At our best, we try to move towards difference, to embrace it, to honor it, to understand it. Our aim is not to simply be tolerant, but be curious, inclusive, and welcoming. This is one of our greatest strengths as a faith. It's who we aspire to be. But there's aspiration, and then there's reality. There are too many times when, frankly, we aren't inclusive, when we don't reach across difference, or we don't communicate well. There are times when we fail as allies to those who need it most. We are flawed human beings, after all, who give in to our reptilian tribal brains more often than we care to admit. But in spite of our failures, we usually work to repair them. Eventually, our commitment to our Unitarian Universalist principles and values calls us back to creating a just world and acting from compassion and integrity. It's who we aspire to be. So what would it take for us to truly welcome the stranger, to not just sing, "Come, come, whoever you are"? What would it take for us to create an environment of radical hospitality to the stranger here in our congregations? Now, I know some of you have been attending here a long, long time, and others much shorter, and some may even be new here today. But so that we all get a sense of what it might be like to be a stranger in a new community, I invite you to come with me on a brief dystopian fantasy. Fasten your seatbelts. Imagine you've moved to a new city where you don't know anyone, and you're looking for a church home. You go to your local Unitarian Universalist congregation. As you walk in, no one greets you. You feel nervous and a little out of place, a bit embarrassed, and you try to figure out where to go. You can't find a visitor's table or a greeter to orient you, and you don't want to stick out by asking. You want to join in, but you don't know what the norms are in this congregation. You don't know where to sit, when to stand, where the hymnals are. And you'd love to go to the restroom before the service, but there are no signs. So you wander around, trying not to draw attention to yourself. Everyone seems to be rushing around, and those that aren't are in small groups having seemingly intimate conversations with their friends. You feel uncomfortable. But you participate in the service anyway and hope that things will become clearer. During the service, they ask you to raise your hand if you're new. That feels a little exposing, but you hope that someone will talk to you later. After the service, no one comes up to you to welcome you and show you where the coffee hour takes place. So you wander around and eventually you find the coffee. You stand in line, finally get a cup, and then stand alone drinking it. No one talks to you. Finally, you put your coffee cup away and decide to go home. So, imagining that, how are you feeling right now? I'm not feeling so great. In fact, I don't know about you, but I'd probably never go back to that congregation. So, let's imagine a different way. A way that shows radical hospitality in which we live into our principles as Unitarian Universalists. Before becoming a minister, as you heard earlier, I was membership coordinator at the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara for several years. Welcoming the stranger was my job. What I learned was to actively seek out the stranger or anyone who seemed lost or uncomfortable. Remaining sensitive to the fact that some newcomers just want to blend in and not be talked to, I would introduce myself and others when it seemed appropriate. Together with my membership team, we'd attempt to connect by being curious and listening to each person's unique story. We asked what brought them into our midst and what was important to them. We endeavored to introduce them to others who might share their interests or circumstances. And then we'd invite them to join us for appropriate church activities. Meanwhile, we'd send them an email to follow up and sometimes call them later that week to welcome them to our community. And when they returned the following week, we'd remember their names, hand them a name tag, and ask specific questions pertinent to their lives. Here's what an interaction might look like. Holly, will you come up and join me? Hi, welcome, Holly. It's lovely to meet you. What brings you here today? Always begin with genuine curiosity.
Well, I've been looking for a home, and I found you on the web, and I've really been wanting to find a place where I can introduce my family to new people.
Oh, great. And then trying to connect, I might respond with, well, that's exactly what brought me to church the first time. I have a son, and our family was looking for a spiritual home, a community where we could answer some of the more difficult questions of life and have sort of progressive liberal values.
Well, that sounds great to me. I mean, I noticed that it's pretty challenging to be a parent. I've been really searching with help on how to answer those big questions, and I'd really like to meet some other parents.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. Now, after being welcoming, curious, and forming a connection with her, the next part is to extend an invitation. I'd love to introduce you to our Director of Religious Exploration, as well as a family who has kids just your age. Maybe your kids will become friends. And then they can show you around and where to go and tell you more about our community. Oh, we also have a parent support group with childcare on Wednesday nights, in case you're interested. And that's a wonderful way to build community and meet some other parents in the area.
I'm very interested. I would love to do that. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Holly. It's wonderful meeting you. And there, through this very simple process of being curious, connecting, and inviting, this family will probably come back and is likely to be integrated into our community. Of course, the conversation continued after the service, and one of our member families sat with them during worship. Curiosity, connection, and invitation are the foundation for radical hospitality. How different my experience would have been at school in England if the children had approached me in that way. How different would it have been for the newcomer at the dystopian UU congregation, being greeted with curiosity, connection, and invitation. So, should you ever find yourself hesitant to welcome a stranger or a newcomer, I invite you to wonder, what gifts might this stranger bring into our midst? What might I learn from them? The miracle is that in reaching across the divide of newness and difference, we may find that strangers aren't that different after all. We may find that they no longer seem like strangers. We may find that they become the us of our future. May we keep our hearts open to the stranger. May we always remember that we too were once the outsider. May we be welcoming to those new in our midst, leading with curiosity, connection, and invitation. And may we honor our interconnectedness, always showing radical hospitality towards the stranger. Come, come, whoever you